Have you ever noticed something strange? Two men walk into the same room. One is handsome, charismatic, and says all the right things. The other barely speaks. He isn't trying to entertain anyone. He isn't showing off his success. He isn't chasing attention. Yet somehow, she keeps looking at him. Why? What invisible force makes one man unforgettable while another becomes just another face in the crowd? Most people believe attraction begins with appearance. Some think it's confidence. Others believe it's money, status, or the perfect pickup line. But after thousands of years of observing human nature, the Stoic philosophers reached a completely different conclusion. Attraction doesn't begin with what people see. It begins with what they feel in your presence. And that's exactly where most men fail. Today, people are obsessed with learning what to say. The perfect opener, the perfect compliment, the perfect text message. They memorize conversation tricks, watch dating coaches, practice clever lines, and still wonder why their conversations never lead anywhere meaningful. Because they're solving the wrong problem. The words were never the real issue. The man behind those words is. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Most people read that quote as advice for dealing with hardship, but it applies just as powerfully to attraction. Because the moment your happiness depends on someone else's approval, you stop leading the interaction and you begin chasing it. Female psychology notices this almost immediately. Not because women are secretly analyzing every word you say, but because the human brain constantly scans for emotional stability. Long before someone decides whether they like your personality, their subconscious is already asking silent questions. Is this man emotionally secure? Does he need validation? Can he stay calm when things don't go his way? These questions are rarely spoken, but they quietly shape attraction. This is something most men never realize. Neediness doesn't announce itself. It leaks through tiny behaviors. Speaking too fast, trying too hard to be funny, constantly checking her reaction after every sentence, explaining yourself when nobody asked, oversharing just to seem interesting, seeking reassurance with every smile. The words may sound confident, but the emotional energy tells a different story. And energy always speaks louder than language. Stoicism teaches something that modern dating advice often ignores. Presence is more powerful than performance. The strongest man in the room isn't always the loudest. It's the one who doesn't feel the need to prove he's strong. Think about the people you've admired most. Were they constantly trying to impress everyone? Probably not. They moved with quiet confidence. They listened more than they spoke. They weren't desperate to become the center of attention. Ironically, that made everyone pay attention to them. Because calmness creates curiosity, and curiosity is where attraction begins. Imagine walking into a social gathering. One man dominates every conversation. He's telling stories, making jokes, interrupting people, trying to be unforgettable. For a few minutes, he seems entertaining. But after a while, people become emotionally tired. Now notice another man across the room. He smiles naturally. He listens carefully. When he speaks, he says something thoughtful. Then he becomes comfortable with silence. He doesn't rush to fill every empty pause. He isn't competing for attention. Yet somehow, people slowly gather around him. Why? Because calmness feels rare. In a world addicted to noise, stillness becomes magnetic. Seneca understood this centuries ago. He believed that emotional self-control was one of the greatest forms of strength. Not because it made life easier, but because it made a person unshakable. An unshakable person changes the emotional atmosphere of every room they enter. And here's where female psychology becomes fascinating. Many people assume women are naturally attracted to excitement, but that's only half the story. Excitement may capture attention. Emotional safety keeps attention. Those are two very different things. Anyone can create excitement for a moment. Very few people create peace. And the human nervous system never forgets the difference. When a woman feels emotionally safe around someone, her body relaxes before her mind even understands why. Her shoulders soften, her breathing slows, her laughter becomes more natural. The conversation flows without effort. Nothing feels forced. This isn't magic, it's biology. Our brains are constantly evaluating emotional environments. They ask one question above all others. Is I safe here? Safety isn't weakness. Safety isn't boredom. Safety is emotional consistency. It's knowing someone won't explode over small disagreements. It's knowing they don't crumble when things become uncomfortable. It's knowing their emotions aren't controlled by other people's opinions. That's exactly what Stoicism develops. Not coldness, not emotional distance, but emotional mastery. Unfortunately, modern culture teaches the opposite. Social media rewards people who perform, show more, say more, prove more, post more, react faster, seek more attention. But Stoicism quietly whispers something completely different. The more desperately you seek validation, the less valuable you appear. Why? Because chasing approval tells the world that you haven't yet approved of yourself. Confidence doesn't ask, "Do you like me?" Confidence quietly says, "I'm comfortable whether you do or not." Notice something important. That doesn't mean becoming arrogant. Stoicism has nothing to do with ego. True Stoic confidence is humble. It doesn't need to dominate conversations. It doesn't need to win every argument. It doesn't need to be the smartest person in the room. Because it isn't competing. It's simply present. And presence is becoming one of the rarest qualities in modern society. Most people don't actually listen anymore. They're busy preparing their next sentence, thinking about how they look, wondering if they're saying the right thing, planning how to impress. They're physically present, but mentally somewhere else. A Stoic does the opposite. He gives complete attention to the present moment. Ironically, that alone makes him far more attractive than someone trying to impress. People remember how you made them feel, not because you entertained them, but because they felt seen, they felt heard, they felt understood. And that's where genuine attraction quietly begins. But here's something even more interesting. Being calm is only the first step. Because once emotional stability is established, there's another psychological principle that starts working beneath the surface. It's a principle that causes someone's mind to keep thinking about you even after the conversation has already ended. The Stoics understood it. Modern psychology explains it. And once you learn how it works, you'll never look at conversations the same way again. Imagine this. You're talking to a woman for the very first time. The conversation is pleasant. You ask where she's from. She asks what you do. You exchange a few laughs. Everything seems to be going well. But 20 minutes later, she barely remembers the conversation. Not because you said something wrong, but because nothing made her mind pause. Nothing gave her a reason to keep thinking about you after you walked away. This is where most men misunderstand attraction. They believe attraction grows through constant talking. The Stoics believed the exact opposite. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is almost nothing at all. That sounds strange in a world where everyone is taught to speak louder, faster, and more confidently. But Marcus Aurelius understood something modern psychology now confirms. The human mind is naturally drawn towards unfinished experiences. Whenever the brain encounters something incomplete, it keeps searching for an answer. Psychologists often call this the Zeigarnik effect. The mind remembers unfinished thoughts better than finished ones. That's why an unanswered question stays in your head, why an incomplete movie keeps bothering you, why an incomplete story refuses to leave your mind. Curiosity is psychological tension, and tension creates attention. This isn't manipulation, it's simply how the human brain works. The Stoics understood this long before psychology had a name for it. Epictetus taught that wisdom begins not by speaking more, but by observing more. Most people rush to explain themselves. Think about the last person who made you feel completely comfortable. They probably weren't talking nonstop. They weren't trying to entertain you every second. They simply made the conversation feel effortless. That's emotional leadership. And emotional leadership is one of the most attractive qualities a person can develop. Here's another mistake many men make. They believe mystery comes from pretending to be mysterious. They answer every question vaguely, they act emotionally unavailable, they try to appear difficult to understand. That's not mystery. That's confusion. Real intrigue comes from selective honesty. Instead of hiding everything, you reveal meaningful pieces of yourself naturally. Imagine she asks, "What do you usually do on weekends?" Most people give predictable answers. "I watch movies. I go to the gym. I hang out with friends." There's nothing wrong with those answers, but they reveal almost nothing about who you are. A Stoic answer sounds different. "Honestly, one of my favorite things is taking long walks without music or podcasts, just silence. It helps me organize my thoughts." Notice what happened? You didn't try to sound impressive. You revealed something authentic, something specific, something that reflects your values. Now curiosity appears again. Why silence? What does he think about during those walks? That's different. Authenticity naturally creates intrigue. Pretending never does. Marcus Aurelius spent countless hours alone with his thoughts, not because he hated people, but because he understood something extraordinary. The quality of your conversations depends on the quality of your inner world. If your mind is chaotic, your conversations become chaotic. If your emotions constantly chase validation, your words will chase validation too. But when your mind becomes peaceful, your speech naturally slows down. Your voice becomes steadier, your eye contact becomes softer, your reactions become intentional instead of impulsive. People notice this, even if they can't explain why. Here's another fascinating truth about female psychology. Women often remember emotional experiences far longer than specific conversations. Years later, she may forget your exact words, but she'll remember how relaxed she felt around you, how easy it was to laugh, how she never felt judged, how the conversation seemed to slow down in the best possible way. That's because emotion creates memory. Facts fade. Feelings remain. Stoicism isn't teaching you how to attract people. It's teaching you how to become the kind of person whose emotional presence naturally leaves a lasting impression. And here's the paradox. The less obsessed you become with creating attraction, the more naturally attraction begins to appear. Because confidence doesn't chase connection, it creates the conditions where connection can grow. But curiosity alone isn't enough. There's another layer that determines whether someone simply enjoys talking to you or begins trusting you emotionally. It's something most compliments completely fail to achieve, because most compliments focus on appearance. The Stoics understood something much deeper. People don't truly open their hearts to those who admire how they look. They open them to those who recognize who they are. There's a mistake almost every man makes. It sounds harmless, It even sounds polite. Imagine this. Two men leave the exact same conversation. The first spends the rest of the evening wondering, did she like me? Should I text first? Did I say something wrong? Maybe I should have been funnier. His mind becomes a prison. Every memory is replayed, every sentence is analyzed, every silence becomes a mistake. Now imagine the second man. He smiles, he appreciates the conversation, then he moves on with his day. Not because he doesn't care, but because he understands one simple Stoic truth. Your peace should never depend on someone else's opinion. That single principle changes everything. Because attraction is not created by chasing outcomes. It is created by becoming emotionally free from them. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every morning that he could not control how other people would think, feel, or behave. The only thing truly under his control was his own character. Now, think about modern relationships. How many people suffer not because someone rejected them, but because they cannot stop replaying the rejection? They lose sleep, they lose confidence, sometimes they even lose themselves. The Stoics would ask one question: why surrender your inner peace to something you were never meant to control? This isn't about pretending rejection doesn't hurt. Of course it does. Stoicism never teaches emotional numbness. It teaches emotional resilience. Pain is natural. Suffering becomes optional when we stop resisting reality. Female psychology quietly notices this resilience. Because emotionally secure people don't collapse when life becomes uncertain. They don't become desperate. They don't beg for attention. They don't constantly seek reassurance. They remain grounded. And grounded people feel incredibly safe to be around. Here's something most men misunderstand. Detachment does not mean acting cold. It does not mean ignoring messages. It does not mean pretending you don't care. That's emotional immaturity disguised as confidence. Real Stoic detachment means something much deeper. You care without becoming dependent. You appreciate without becoming attached. You love without trying to possess. There's enormous freedom in that mindset. Imagine planting a tree. You water it, you protect it, you give it sunlight, but you don't pull on the branches every morning hoping it will grow faster. Relationships work the same way. The harder people force connection, the more they interrupt it. Connection grows naturally, never through pressure, always through consistency. Epictetus said, "Do not seek for things to happen the way you want them to happen. Rather, wish that what happens happens the way it happens, and your life will flow well." That philosophy applies beautifully to attraction. You cannot force chemistry. You cannot negotiate genuine interest. You cannot convince someone to value you. But you can become someone whose peace remains untouched regardless of the outcome. Ironically, that emotional freedom often becomes deeply attractive. Why? Because emotionally independent people create emotional safety. They're not trying to take something from you. They're simply sharing their presence. There's another hidden truth most people never realize. People are naturally drawn toward those who already enjoy their own company. Think about someone who genuinely loves their life. They have meaningful work, ease every day with curiosity and appreciation. Healthy friendships, personal goals, strong values. Whether they're single or in a relationship, their identity remains intact. Now, compare that to someone whose happiness depends entirely on one person's attention. The emotional difference is enormous. One person radiates abundance, the other radiates fear of loss. And fear quietly changes behavior. It creates jealousy, overthinking, neediness, control. None of these begin with love. They begin with insecurity. Stoicism cuts insecurity at its root because it reminds us that our value was never created by another person's approval. It already existed. Female psychology often responds positively to this emotional independence because it communicates stability. Not perfection, not dominance, stability. A stable person doesn't panic during disagreements. They don't explode over misunderstandings. They don't constantly test someone's loyalty. They communicate honestly. They listen carefully, and when necessary, they're willing to walk away with dignity rather than remain where respect no longer exists. Walking away isn't about punishment. It's about self-respect. Marcus Aurelius believed that no relationship should require abandoning your principles. The moment you betray your values just to keep someone's attention, you've already lost something far more important than attraction. You've lost yourself. That is why Stoicism places character above outcomes, because outcomes change, character remains. Now, let's step back and look at everything we've explored together. First, we discovered that attraction begins with presence, not performance. Then we learned that curiosity creates emotional engagement far more effectively than constant talking. Next, we explored why recognizing someone's character leaves a deeper emotional imprint than praising their appearance. And finally, we uncovered the greatest Stoic lesson of all. The strongest man is never the one who controls another person's emotions. He's the one who has mastered his own. That is real confidence, not loud confidence, quiet confidence. The kind that never needs to announce itself, the kind that makes people feel calm simply by being around you. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson Stoicism has ever offered. Your goal in life should never be to become attractive. Your goal should be to become so emotionally grounded that attraction becomes a natural consequence of who you are. Because people eventually forget expensive cars, they forget clever pickup lines, they even forget perfect conversations. But they rarely forget how someone made them feel. If your presence brought peace, if your words carried honesty, if your actions reflected integrity, that memory will stay far longer than anything money or appearance could ever create. So the next time you meet someone new, don't ask yourself, how do I impress this person? Instead, ask, can I remain calm, present, and authentic regardless of what happens? Because the answer to that question will shape every conversation that follows. And remember one final Stoic truth. The man who no longer seeks validation becomes the man who is hardest to ignore. Not because he is chasing attention, but because he has finally discovered something far more valuable: inner peace. And in a world filled with noise, insecurity, and endless performance, there is nothing more magnetic than a person who is completely at peace with themselves.